Hey guys, Matthew here, and today I'll bring you the video on the updated Ball Lightning Miner video that I made the other day, given the patch notes, the nerf to slower projectiles, the nerf to critical strike multiplier as a whole, the change in the path of building, and everything else. Before that though, I want to give you guys a quick rundown of how Ball Lightning works. Essentially, Ball Lightning ticks every 150 milliseconds for a maximum of 13 times per ball, and it is one ball per cast. So multiple balls in a single cast due to something like Dying Sun or the Helmet Enchant will not actually shotgun in terms of damage. It will help with the clear, but it won't help with the damage. So before, our lesser projectile would basically give us minus 49% projectile speed, and then from the Ascendency we were getting 30% increased AoE for a total of, as you can see, well, even without the 30% from the Ascendency, which is located right here, 30% increased area of effect. Even without that, with just a radius of 22, which is the base radius of Ball Lightning, we were reaching the cap of 13 ticks per ball, which means maximum damage. Now they nerf this, and level 20 Solar Projectile is only 30% less projectile speed. That is a pretty massive nerf. As you can see, we went from 13 ticks to 9 ticks, which is 4 less ticks, which is pretty much 30% less damage. So how do we basically mitigate that and try to get more ticks to happen? Because we want as much damage as we used to have. Well, the Ascendancy gives us 30, obviously, which we have on base, so that 30% is pretty nice to have. But that only gives us brings us to 10. So after lots of messing around with this, I have found out that the lowest you can get to 13 ticks is 100%. So even 90 won't quite cut it. So you do have to get to 100% increased AoE, since there is no real source of more AoE anywhere on the tree or anything like that. So we can only do so by getting 100% increased AoE on the tree to get us to that 13 ticks. Now, one thing to note is that Ball Lightning does not gain damage from area damage, unfortunately, so any area damage is actually pretty much a waste. But let's get into basically the path of building. Link will be in the description. This is the updated path of building with the leveling tree. You'll see that there's a couple things that changed. Instead of going this route here, which is the route that I used to take to get this life and all this good stuff, since we aren't going on the top side here anymore, we're going on the bottom side to basically save some regrets. We're going to be pathing a little bit differently. We're going to be rushing volatile mines after we get Sabo and Elemental Focus. Anyways, that's going to be the leveling tree. You guys can, figure that out however you want. You should probably rush the trap and mine wheel and then just fill in the rest as you go. But there is the leveling tree for you guys who are asking for that. Now you'll see that instead of going from the top side and grabbing Cruel Preparation and Prodigal Perfection or potentially this Jewel Socket, we're actually going through the bottom side here to grab Annihilation. So that's pretty much one of the first change. The second change comes at level 80. That's where we probably want to switch to Ball Lightning. Personally, I like to level with Arc until Maps, and when I get to Maps, I'll switch over to Ball Lightning. But Ball Lightning already has more than enough damage to kill everything really, really quickly until you get to higher tier content, which is why you don't really care about the number of ticks on the Ball Lightning until, later a little bit. So at level 80, which is, pretty easy to get level 80 in the game. You can get level 80 within a few hours just blasting some white tier maps, so obviously not very hard. You'll see that we still have the 30% from our Ascendancy, and then if we look at this, you'll see that we are also grabbing this area effect here, and we are getting 30%, which brings us to 60% AoE. This is at level 30. So 60% AoE will bring us to 11 ticks. So it's already a little bit of an upgrade from the 10 ticks. For 3 points, we're getting to 60 AoE, which is giving us 11 ticks, which is getting close to that 13. Now, how do we get a little bit more? Well, then you're going to respec once you hit level 80 to try to get yourself a few nodes. So it's not a big respec, honestly. It's just getting more life. We are going to lose this elemental damage here because it's really not worth it. Instead, we're going to path through the intelligent. We're going to drop elemental focus for assassination because 35 multi is a lot. Even if they nerf that node to 25% multi, it's still very, very worth taking. Otherwise, we're just grabbing extra life nodes. So the goal here is just to be a little bit more tanky for mapping. That's why we just grab more life node at level 80. And then the next tree is, you'll see, level 92. So in the POB, I actually put 2 level 92 trees. There is a level 92 tree for one setup and a level 92 tree for another setup. The first setup is considering the fact that you are using this mapping setup here, tree number 1, which is the minefield charge mine setup. This is based on basically clearing maps faster with minefield, and that's about it. Now, what changes on this level 93 on this tree at level 93? You'll see that in terms of area effect, nothing really changed. Honestly, we still have this 30% here. We're getting one extra node for 40 instead of 30, which brings us to 70. But that's about it. So that brings us to 70. So that's only 12 ticks. We're still not at 13. So how do we get to 13? I did say that the minimum required is 100% AoE to get to 13. So how do we get that? Well, by using minefield, you throw 5 mines at a time, and our Ascendency right here gives us 4% increased area of effect for each mine. So if you have a tremor rod and you're using minefield, your mines will rearm themselves behind you as you're going through the map. So you at all times have more than 5 mines. So more than 5 mines, if we go from 40% here, 30% there, and 5, that brings us to 90. But we're always at more than 5. Actually, from my own testing, when I was mapping with minefield setup, I realized that I was pretty much at all times on 10 mines, which gives us 40 AoE, which brings us to 110, which is the 13 ticks that we so desperately want if we want to maximize our single target damage, especially. So on this tree, this is level 92, which I think is achievable for most players who play the game even just a few hours a day, really. Even just like, 2 hours a day or something, and like a couple more on the weekend maybe. So it shouldn't be too long to hit level 92, honestly. You'll see that we are getting these 13 ticks, and another thing we're getting, which is different from the tree that I had beforehand, is we're getting a lot more jewel sockets. So we're getting 1 jewel socket, 2 jewel socket, 3 jewel sockets, 4 jewel sockets, and 5 jewel sockets. And we're also getting a lot more life. We're getting like this life node that we didn't get, this one, we're getting this stuff here. We're getting this one, we're getting quite a bit of life, quite a bit of quality of life, because these jewel sockets all allow us to put either, resistances or more life, critical strike multiplier, mine throwing speed, which is pretty damn important when it comes to the minefield setup. You're going to want to prioritize jewels with mine throwing speed. It's going to pretty much feel better to get the mine throwing speed than to get, say, more multiplier on your jewels. So if you can get some life jewels with more throwing speed, more mine throwing speed, I think it's like 7% per jewel, it's actually quite nice. And it's going to feel a lot better, especially because minefield feels really awful until you get a decent amount of mine throwing speed. Now, since we're getting, as I mentioned, 4 jewel sockets, the reason why we get this mana is because to run double auras, especially with minefield, since we're throwing so many mines, we tend to run into some mana issues, so this 8% mana actually goes kind of a long way. So what have we dropped? Well, we dropped Cruel Preparation, which is obviously a decent bit of life. We're talking about 15% life and 5 all res. But that's really it. We also did drop this 20% spell crit node, but nothing huge. So the tree didn't really change too much. Now, the second alternative tree is what I would like to call basically the higher end tree in terms of damage, but a little bit less quality of life. So mostly this quality of life drops tends to be from the fact that we lose Destructive Apparatus. Destructive Apparatus gives us 20% mine throwing speed, which is pretty huge, and also 10% less damage taken, which is actually kind of a big deal. Think about how much damage you're taking, and then you're taking 10% less. Kind of huge. Now, what do we get instead when we go with the alternative setup? Well, the alternative setup gets more AoE. So instead of going minefield, since remember how I said with minefield you always have more than like 10 mines, without minefield, you don't really have 10 mines. You mostly have 5 mines at all times. So that doesn't quite put us over the cap. So what I did is we get this 30% here. We get this 30% here, which puts us to 60. We get another 20% here. That puts us at 80. And we get the final 20% from Arcane Expense, which is a little bit of damage, nothing crazy, but a little bit of AoE, and that brings us to the cap of 100, which we need to, sorry about that, to get our 13 hits per cast. So that's quite nice, and then we don't have to have any amount of mines to basically hit the cap. Now, obviously, if you realize that while you're mapping, you always have, let's say, 5 or even 10 mines at a time, then you can go ahead and, like, say, drop Arcane Expense or drop these potential nodes here. Now, what does this tree get more than the alternative one, the first one? Well, since we're saving all these points here, we end up just getting more jewel sockets. So we get 1 jewel socket, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we get 2 extra jewel sockets, which is potential for basically, 14% life if you get 7% jewel sockets, or more mine throwing speed if you want to go the minefield route. That being said, if you are going the minefield route, I highly recommend going for destructive apparatus because, like I said, you get the 20% mine throwing speed, which is quite huge. But another reason is that 10% damage reduction actually matters more when you're using minefield because you tend to be more stuck in place. You're going to be stuck in your animation while throwing those 5 mines at a time a little bit more than how mobile you would be if you don't have minefield, which is why I personally don't need destructive apparatus when I'm not running minefield because my character is very, very mobile, which allows me to just not get hit, as I showed in the video, in the 20 chaos video. In that particular setup, that would be the quality of life setup, which is tree number 2. You go ball lightning, elemental focus, trap in mine, inspiration, and hypothermia to maximize critical strike chance and also just pure single target damage. A lot of people are asking me, why does hypothermia work? Hypothermia works because we run skitterbots, and skitterbots are going to take care of chilling monsters, and hypothermia does damage against chilled monsters. It doesn't do damage against monsters you chilled, any chilled monsters, and every monster is pretty much chilled when you have skitterbots because skitterbots are untargetable, and they always kind of just go on target. So especially for single target damage, it's actually a pretty big boost in damage. Now, I didn't really put items in the tree other than things that are really considered mandatory, which is, well, first off, a Tremor Rod. I think Edziri's Steps are pretty much mandatory because we are a build taking advantage of phase acro, which is pretty huge. And otherwise, we are using Malachi's Artifice to get elemental equilibrium by using Armageddon Brand inside of it. And then we have Edziri's Promise, Diamond Flask, and Enduring Mana Flask. That's really it. The other 2 flasks are flex, so you can do whatever you want. So you could go Quicksilver for more move speed. You could go double Life Flask if you're playing hardcore or something. It really comes down to how you want to play it. You could go Granite. You could go Defense Flasks. Pretty much up to you. And finally, when it comes to the Ascendency, there was a bug in the JSON that they sent for the patch notes. We actually still get nearby enemies are blinded, which is a very good thing. I was really, really confused when I saw that they had removed that. But we actually keep it. So we go Born of the Shadows first. Then we go Bomb Specialist for that good AoE and also for the mine throwing speed, which is pretty nice. Also just a ton of damage. And then we go Pyromaniac for the regen and the immune to shock. And finally we finish off with Explosive Experts for the AoE and also because it's a huge amount of damage. Now, if you're a softcore gamer like myself, I'll probably end up going Explosive Expert before Pyromaniac. Because I don't really care about dying, I'll probably have a Cast on Death portal set up in map anyways. So I'm not going to worry too much about that. Instead, I'll probably go Explosive Expert and try to maximize my damage because we do lose a decent bit of critical strike multiplier. Now, the whole slower proj thing, basically we can mitigate that with the area of effect like I just showed in the previously. But what we can't really mitigate is the loss of critical strike multiplier. So from the look of it, every node that used to have 15% critical strike multiplier now has 10. And overall, over the whole tree, what we're pathing through seems like we lose about 40% critical strike multiplier on a build that used to have about 550%. So it's not a whole lot, all things considered. It's about 10% of your critical strike multiplier, which is like 7 to 8% damage or something, probably even less than that. So it's not the biggest deal in the world, but you know, by going with Explosive Expert first, you kind of get that damage back before if you're struggling with damage, and then you can always get Pyromaniac later on when for the quality of life and also for the mana reserved. The mana reservation, the 20% reduced mana reservation of skills that throw mines is pretty huge when you're going with the dual or setup. Which would be the end game setup where you're running both Skitterbots and Wrath. But until then, you're just running Skitterbots and Infernal Legion, so you don't really need the mana because you only have one aura. That being said, when you do go to run the double aura setup, you are going to want to switch these nodes here to these nodes there because you are going to have mana issues otherwise. So to be able to run the double aura setup, Wrath and Skitterbots, or Skitterbots alongside Zealotry, you're going to want to run these two nodes here. Obviously, you're going to have Pyromaniac. It's pretty much going to be mandatory. But other than that, what you're really going to need is basically an Enlighten level 3 alongside this 4% mana reserve node, or an Enlighten level 4, which allows you to drop this 4% node, or an Enlighten level 4 with the 4% reserved, which allows you to go with the mine throwing speed instead of the minus mana reserved. So that's essentially all that got changed to the build in the patch notes, and how to mitigate the nerfs, if you will. Link of the POB will be in the description of the video. And that's honestly about it. Now the next video is going to be talking about basically how to price your items most efficiently. But that video is going to be coming probably tomorrow. Hopefully this video clarifies the whole ball lightning, was it a nerf, was it a buff situation. I didn't take in consideration the fact that we are getting a flat 100 lightning damage to the skill, which is quite a big deal. And that alone might make up for the critical strike multiplier that is lost. But my main goal was to get back to these 13 ticks because that's where you get most of your damage on ball lightning. On that note, though, I do want to say a huge thank you to my patron, Gikona, KFish, Scott, Casticus, Minicel, Luro, Ramazan, MrCoffee, Miner, as well as anybody else who wishes to remain anonymous, and anyone else who's basically supported me in the past. Huge thank you to you guys, and until the next one, that's going to be Matthew signing out. Peace.